Hello, everyone. Welcome to session 114 of Libraries in Response. We have today with us the president of the Boston Public Library uh, to give us the story on how how BPL has been dealing with the challenges and the changes. Well, since the last 5 years when we started this and the pandemic kind of changed the world. So we'll get to David Leonard momentarily, but we also want to pay a tribute to President Carter, the late President Carter, 100 years old, just phenomenal, extraordinary career, human statesman. He did so many things, and he was so not of the establishment, and yet he prevailed at least for one term in light of that, and did a lot of really fascinating, helpful things. Like to try to play this, if I may, bear with me. Well, I apologize, but this is oh, well, here it comes.
Georgia, Georgia, the whole day through. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. I said, Georgia, Georgia, a song of you comes as sweet and clear as moonlight through the pine. Her the arms reach out to me. Her the eyes smile tenderly. Still in peaceful dreams I see the road leads back to you. Georgia, peace, no peace I find. Just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind. Say just an old sweet song keeps Georgia on my mind.
Of course, that was the rendition by Ray Charles, with apologies for fair use for anyone. That claymation is called Jimmy the Sea, and it just felt like for us a tribute, appropriate tribute uh, to this guy, rather than listing his formal accomplishments, which have been all over the place. Nevertheless, back to business here. We are the Gigabit Libraries Network. We're an open collaboration of tech innovating libraries around the world. And we are producing the Libraries in Response series now since March of 2020, just coming up on our 5 years of this program. We're partnering with the IFLA, who hosts and records these sessions. IFLA is the International Federation of Library Association Institutions based in The Hague, and at the helm is the head of public policy for IFLA, Stephen Weiber. Thanks again, Stephen. Our series sponsor is IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services, whose sponsorship has really helped us out this last year. This is our kind of go-to symbol of what Libraries in Response is about, our mission, as it were, and that the world here is, in fact, a lot of people as opposed to a round orb, which it is also, but it's these people that rely on libraries in dealing with crises. Of course, these are large-scale planetary crises, but crises come in every scale, down to the personal level that people bring to their libraries. So they're just wonderful, and that's our whole role, is to support libraries, supporting people who are dealing with all kinds of challenges and crises. This image is compliments of Cal. He's the economist, political cartoonist, who's given us permission to use this, and it also was a guest a couple of weeks ago. This is a shorthand of, the climate crisis, which among all those crises, I would offer is the big kahuna of crises. It kind of shrinks the other things to sort of temporal, momentary, or just less comprehensive types of challenges that we're dealing with here. And it comes in all these different forms as the weather patterns shift, as we expect more extreme, if not more frequent, weather events, weather-driven disasters. And we're experiencing one now in Southern California. Altadena is just north of Pasadena, and that's like the entire town on fire. It's happening right now, and there's not much to do with these winds traveling at 80, 100 miles an hour. It's just a blast furnace going through and just igniting everything in its path. So good luck to those poor people. If you are in such a situation, any of these, hurricanes, floods, the whole panoply of general regional disasters, we suggest that you put ITDRC on your speed dial. This is a group based in Fort Worth. It's several thousand volunteers. These are all trained people in disaster recovery, in communications, and IT systems. So they will come in as quickly as they can and set up relief centers. Communication is like the number one thing people want when a big event comes down. They want to contact everybody to make sure everybody's okay. And then they want electricity to charge their phones, and they want water and food and the rest of it. But this is a great group. They offer this free service. It's just call them. That's it. They're great. Next week we have Bill McKibben, noted climate activist, maybe almost as well known as Greta Thunberg, but certainly is a champion for dealing with this crisis, which we continue to deny and avoid now decades on. Speaking of Jimmy Carter, he was kind of the first one that really stepped up and said, we need to deal with this thing. It's coming. Jimmy, by the way, was an engineer, one of only two presidents that we've had as engineers. And he took this stuff pretty seriously. This is some of the things that we've been involved in. Gigabit Libraries have been around, for closing on 20 years now. And these are various projects that we're proud of and have led to Libraries in Response. We're very proud of. So to our speaker, and welcome to David Leonard, the president of Boston Public Library. David, we're so happy to have you. This quote, with change, flexibility, and agility, now an essential part of DNA of public libraries, we are, and where are we going in 2025? That's what this is about today. Maybe we look back a little bit, but mainly this is about looking at this new year, which we welcome you to it. and also to touch on one of the crises we just mentioned, AI, which has been our most popular topic since we began. AI is the harbinger, a huge harbinger of social change, and libraries must be part of it. Absolutely well said, David. And thank you for being here, and welcome back.
Um,
And let
thank you, Don. It's good to be back with Gigabit Libraries Network and this digital village convening. Happy to be with you all and share a little bit about the past year at BPL and what's ahead, and reflections on the challenges to us as a library profession, the sector, and our world.
terrific.
Maybe just a little bit about myself to get us started before I go into the presentation that I prepared.
Yes, please.
I am now in my 9th year as head of the Boston Public Library, and I continue to refer to myself as the accidental leader of the BPL. This was not necessarily a position that I pursued or thought I would have the opportunity to have, but I joined the Boston Public Library leadership team in 2009 as Chief Technology Officer. So those AI challenges we were talking about, happy to give you my thoughts there in a little bit. Through a series of circumstances, had the honor and privilege of being chosen to lead the institution forward, building on the shoulders of those who have come before us. My own background is a mixture of academic, nonprofit, technology, business consulting in the private sector space. And so perhaps just for this moment, those are a pretty decent set of skills and experiences to put at the disposal of this public library. Boston Public Library is, of course, one of the first in the US, the first large municipally funded public library. A couple of other peers go back a little further, but often we are regarded as the place where at scale much of public library work truly began. In today's world, we are about 540, about 25 branches in a central library in the city of Boston. We serve the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as the library for the Commonwealth. And our collection, when you add special and research collections, is estimated to be between 20 and 23 million objects, one of the third largest physical collections or total collections in the US library world. Without further ado, let me just bring up my slides, and we will get started on the formal part of the presentation, which we will then follow with some question and answer time. So here we go. Great. I think hopefully, Don, you can see that just to get us started. So we're going to start with a little bit of what BPL accomplished over 2024. If I can make my slides advance, and there we go. So here's our infographic for 2024. I'm not going to go over every single number here, but there's a few that I'm really proud of, and our team here is amazing. So we're glad to see the results of our work. So we saw over 2.3 million in-person visits to our locations in the city of Boston in 2024. At one point, we were among the top 3 most visited locations in Boston, Faneuil Hall and Fenway Park being the other 2, incidentally, but these are really strong visitor numbers in today's world. We are still very much about books. A lot of the borrowing of books and reading of our materials has shifted to online. But our circulation numbers for 2024 saw over 1.8 million physical items circulate. And the comparable number for our e-content, 4.8 million items borrowed from the library through our digital platforms. So both of those are growth numbers. And that's kind of interesting. Clearly the demand is mostly in the digital space, but certain aspects of our physical borrowing are still really, really strong. People like to borrow children's books for the youngest ones. They like to check out biographies, romance novels, science fiction, things like that. Right across the board. We're still seeing overall a shift from physical to digital, but both are in a good, strong position here. We also saw about 148,000 new library cards issued. And that's not all just our young people who are showing up to our Boston Public Schools, but people of all ages subscribing for their library cards. And you can see some of the other interesting statistics here that we're particularly proud of. So I wanted to start out then with really our chart of the good news story about 2024 for BPL and for public libraries. Libraries are vital, loved, and well used. And I think our statistics that I shared bear that out. Other parts of the country, you might see some of those numbers stronger and others weaker, depending on what local interest and local use is. But overall, I want to start with the assumption that we are vital, we are loved and well used. Support of reading remains strong and at the core of what libraries have to offer. We might think of our literacies as a little broader than simply reading, or even the reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's that I was certainly brought up with. Today, we think about digital literacy, we think about media literacy, we think about other literacies as being essential for success later in life. And clearly, we still focus on the fact that the 3rd grade reading level is still one of the strongest indicators, if not the strongest indicator, of success later in life. So if our young people are falling behind their reading level attainment targets, chances of them catching up diminish as the years go by. So reading really, really strong, really, really important in the work of public libraries. We've seen library cards sign up be strong. We've seen visitor counts also strong. I think if you asked us 10 to 15 years ago, we might not have been so sure what the future of public libraries were as the internet came online, as digital and technology advanced, and we weren't truly sure if this was going to fully replace the role that we played. But I think today we see that it's not analog or in person versus digital and technological, but it's really both together in a way that makes sense. We also see, I think, in the post-pandemic world, a demand for more space that people can use, whether it's we want to be in a 3rd space because we no longer go into the office as much, or we want to have a place to meet with colleagues or friends, or perhaps we have a telemedicine or telehealth appointment that we want to make, and we don't want to do that from home, so we go to the library for those kind of services. So I think we're seeing an evolution of space, public space, library space, as essential to our mission, and no longer simply the container within which our collections and our programs and services happen. We also saw strong interest in unpacking history, perhaps in an inclusive way, and doing more storytelling. And overall, free is important. At the end of the day, once you get past libraries and parks, there's not a lot of free public spaces for people to gather in society. And so we offer that also. Now, 2024 was not without its challenges, and many of these challenges will continue in the years ahead. So I've laid your foundation of the good news story, and now let's move into really some of the challenges that we saw and which shaped the challenges ahead also. At BPL, and I know from my colleagues both in public libraries, in school libraries, and in academic libraries, many of these are shared concerns as well. We see a greater number of users and patrons come through our doors that really require a range of basic services. In many cases, it's people who are housing insecure or homeless, who are looking for respite from the day, possibly to connect with someone who can help them or give them a referral to housing support. Many of these individuals, and indeed others as well, some of our teenage year population, are dealing with difficulties in their lives where it's a challenge to conform to the rules of an organization. So they may be acting out, they may have difficulty interacting with other people. That creates an environment where there's safety and security concerns as well. And so we have always welcomed all patrons to our spaces and to our services, but the scale of individuals who are coming today that have difficulty is much, much bigger than it was before. And quite frankly, we don't always have the resources or the capacity, or in some cases, the skills and training to adequately address those. In the case of working with our homeless population, we rely both on partnerships with local nonprofits to ensure we can connect individuals to the services they need, as well as having moved ahead with hiring our own social worker and building out that team as we go forward. Now, the technology and digital equity matter, which is already a good 10 to 15, if not 20 plus years in evidence, is still an opportunity and challenge for many people. You need three things to fully participate technologically in our society. You need a modern device. You need good connectivity, broadband ideally, and you need skills and training to utilize the applications and software that's available. Many individuals, whether not just in a rural environment, but rural, suburban, and the urban deserts, have many members of the population who experience this digital equity gap and rely on the public service at public libraries today. So let's layer on this artificial intelligence opportunity or development that has emerged. In some regards, this is simply the next evolution in automation, smart search, data management, which we need to take advantage of. But equally, we have concerns. The ethical concerns are about how the language models are evolving. Are they using copyright information? Are they giving us the right answer? Or are they hallucinating? So huge opportunity here, both on the, a new technology to harness, but equally something that is disruptive and does not always contribute to the public good. Over the course of the last year, we have seen the continued emergence of intellectual freedom concerns with challenges to materials in our collections. This is often more targeted at school libraries than at public libraries, but not exclusively. And this is occurring everywhere. Our position is that, we have material for all people. It says free to all on the front of the library, and we take the all part as seriously as the free part of that phrase. And while the choice of what material to read is yours and your family's, we will not allow one group of individuals to dictate to another what they can or should have access to. As a result of these concerns in many parts of the country, we have seen the politicization of both public and school libraries. And sometimes this is indirect. Sometimes this creates a chilling effect in the environment where our library staff in institutions, not so much at BPL, but in our neighbors and peers, shy away from what may be perceived as more controversial material in order to avoid being in the spotlight. That is indirect censorship and needs to be as resisted as direct attempts to censor what is in libraries. We all know the phrase, I think, at this point, that every great library has something to offend everybody. And that's a strength and not a liability. If we unpack a little of this set of challenges that we see, themes start to emerge, where much of the challenge is coming often from a very small group of people, but targeted at topics that are by, for, or about the LGBT community, issues of racial justice and racial equity, and indeed the full-on DEI backlash that we are seeing at all levels of our society right now. In our university and academic campus friends, we see these effects having a challenge to how to deal with safe and healthy protest, as well as intellectual freedom in curriculum development within the classroom. So they are not immune either, and see these issues show up in a slightly different way. We continue to see book publishing and ebook distribution disruption, where we know that unlike the physically published book, when it comes to ebooks, we often, as libraries, are limited to licensing or having limited use copies, where we spend our budget on purchasing a license which lasts for a number of circulations, or it lasts for a specific period, unlike the physical book that we buy and have in our collection in perpetuity, or at least until it wears out or we need to replace it. There's continued disruption about how this ecosystem is to work, and it is existential for libraries, for without the ability to purchase and hold materials in perpetuity for preservation and historical research, then that's a large part of our core mission that is under threat. Additionally, we have concerns about some movements and changes at the federal level in the US, particularly with the E-rate program that has for now about 20 years helped fund public and school library connectivity, both in rural and suburban and urban environments. This is a fee that we pay on all of our individual and family and business telecommunications bills. That goes to a pool of money that is administered by the Universal Services Administrative Corporation, a quasi-federal agency, under the rules and guidance established by the FCC. So it is a fully controlled and authorized program, and many of us rely for millions and millions of dollars in support to make connections available that would otherwise be impossible or would consume whole percentages of our budget. And so those are some concerns I have around what we're seeing at BPL, or we're seeing in our peer library communities across the country and region. What's interesting is that many of these factors are also shared internationally by colleagues in IFLA. And I want to share with you just some personal anecdotal reflections, not necessarily backed up by research and data, but anecdotal reflections that mirror these. I don't know whether I was shocked or pleased to realize that many of these concerns are shared by colleagues in libraries across the world. Resource and budget constraints are as real a thing in other parts of the world as they are in the US. The threats to intellectual freedom and politicization are equally as real. They may be slightly newer to the US, that is used to privileging individual freedom and the ability to pursue your own interests, compared with countries that have a longer history with authoritarian regimes or more centrally controlled policies. But we seem to have managed to find a way to export this from the US as well. And so these symptoms are showing up in all countries across the globe. They are connected to a rise of populist movements on the political landscapes, which are often become anti-democratic forces. And obviously things like public education, public libraries, public schools are a part of the target in that context. There is, however, agreement that libraries, as if you will, a purple issue, that one that crosses the political divide, seen by the right, by the left, as a vital educational resource among most, not among all, but among most. And so we take pride in that work is very much appreciated. This, of course, all exists against a backdrop of broader challenges for humanity, for democracies, for society itself. We have points of crisis across the globe. Our hearts and thoughts go out to those on the west coast of the US who are living through these terrible fires that are devastating parts of the world. Our hearts and thoughts go out to those who are living through their own crises, whether they're hitting the global news, like the situation in Ukraine or in Palestine, or other parts of the world that we may hear less about in the US. We know that is part of the reality in which public libraries and all of us exist. And as Don mentioned in his opening introduction, the reality of climate change is now showing up. While science has been telling us and forewarning us about these trends for a long, long time, we are seeing the extremes effect of that in changes in weather patterns and the resulting impacts on populations needing to migrate from one part of the world to another. I do want to shape this against the backdrop of the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. I'll briefly talk about these and just learn that one of the upcoming webinars in this series will actually drill into that in more detail. So I do think these are a good framework. Again, we may hear less about them in the US, but they are a great global framework for understanding what would a healthy, equitable society look like, and which of these 17 goals are most relevant for framing the work of libraries and framing the work of public libraries in particular. So just briefly, a few slides on these 17 goals. I will really just read each of the 17. You can look these up on the web, go to one of the UN websites and see much more detail about the individual targets and actions that fall under all of these 17 goals. So this is really an articulation of the type of world that we might want to have. So we would want a world where there is no poverty, where there is no hunger, that every citizen of the planet, every resident has good access to health and well-being, that they have access to a quality education, at least at basic levels and hopefully beyond, that gender equality is something that we make good progress on and achieve, that clean water and sanitation are the basic fundamentals of any community, that we have access to affordable and clean energy, decent work opportunities, and the opportunity to participate in economic growth, upward mobility, that industry, innovation, and infrastructure are part of a healthy and sustainable community, that we reduce inequalities through progress, that we think of our cities and communities as themselves sustainable entities, embracing responsible consumption and production, that we take action with respect to climate resilience, that we specifically look to life below the water and life on land, that we are working towards peace and justice and strong civic institutions, and that we look to partnership as a way to truly accomplish these goals. So if you're looking for a global framework to pick up the opportunities that are ahead or the challenges that we face, please take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And now, as we turn back to BPL and Boston and to the library community, the opportunities ahead in 2025 are, as I see them, a mixture of the following. We must think of ourselves as patron or user-centered institutions. We are in the people business. Yes, we might have books and we might have buildings, but we're essentially in the people business, and we should be guided by the needs and demands of our patrons. Literacy, reading, books, other literacies remain at the center of our work and allow us to support patrons of all ages to support their success in life. The technology and digital equity gap remains real, something we must confront, both for an individual's personal self-worth, as well as for participating in the economic opportunities in their locality. AI only makes this all the more real, whether it's algorithmic literacy or workforce improvements or access to information, all of which are both opportunities and challenges. We are resource constrained in terms of not just supporting our core missions, but all the newer things that we are asked to do and asked to do more of. So we must engage our funders more broadly as donors, whether they be municipal leaders, state leaders, corporations, or private users and philanthropists. Climate resilience is an important issue for libraries. We have buildings, we have collections. We need to be thinking in terms of how the climate may affect those, as well as looking to educational programming to help our populations understand fact from fiction. And there are new skills to be learned as we prepare for a greener world as part of a climate resiliency response. Finally, the civic engagement opportunity is one that allows us to support our communities in understanding the government at a local level, national and federal and regional levels, and maybe participate in them. This is a civics literacy opportunity that we could embrace and use that as a framework for bridging some of the political divides that are driving us more further apart in society rather than bring us together. It does say free to all on the front of the BPL building. We've added that to recent renovations across all of our branches. And we want to ensure that everybody is welcome regardless of background, regardless of political background, regardless of religious background, regardless of their values. And so we have an opportunity to think of libraries as a platform for greater discourse and dialogue between people who may otherwise disagree. We all need access to information. We need to be able to tell fiction from nonfiction, fact from fiction, and we all want to get along in life. Libraries have a vital role in offering services at this time. And so before I turn to my final slide, I'm just going to pause for a second. We're going to talk you through a little of the library's new strategic plan and the 4 key roles that we play in society. And then we'll be opening up to Q&A. The Boston Public Library, to close out, has just completed its new strategic plan as of December. And the part that I will share with you today is that we are centering our work on 4 key roles in society as expressive of what the public library is about. So the language may be a little different. This may be a framework that is new. Under the covers, I think our work is very much the same. So who are we in community? We are your lifelong learning and research partner. We are a welcoming destination. We are a trusted resource. And we are a community engager. So we're about the individual journey, we're about community, we're about the trusted resources, whether they be information of the day or information about history, and we are about our physical spaces and online spaces in a welcoming dimension. Much more information on that at a later date or on our website, but I thought I would introduce those 4 key roles as a new, interesting framing of what the public library is about. At this point, I'll just conclude my formal presentation and we can get ready to take some questions and answers. I'm sure Don will kick us off in a moment. I share these information resources as places to learn more about any of the topics I've introduced. They will, of course, be familiar to many of our participants who are online, I believe, from the library community, but some may be new to others as well. So Don, that's my little preview of what we've got ahead in 2025 and what these great opportunities and really big challenges are that we are confronted with.
Little nothing. That's that's a world of challenges and changes. I've got a whole page full of questions, but your strategic plan, if you could go back one slide, I think that's really an interesting process. Of course, I always wonder how many libraries or institutions go through that process because it's a challenge itself just to deal with that level of deep questions about mission and resources and the future. So can you just kind of describe that process to us? When was the last time you did it, and how you
Happy
reduced
to do
things
that.
for?
So the last time BPL had a full-on deep, full strategic plan was 2012. And we actually had some debate about what is the right length of time that a strategic plan should take or last. We did a roadmap version in 2019, so we did always have a document that we were updating a little bit, but 13 years is a long time to go without doing the full plan. We know that there's a trend towards doing 3-year plans because the world is changing around us so fast. We think that's probably a little too often, and so we settled on a 5-year plan. So we think this plan that we completed in December should guide us for, in detail, at least 5 years. And some of our larger projects may persist beyond that. But we also want to move from this being something that you do once and then you come back to it several years later. We want this to be a living, updatable plan that we use on a monthly basis, and that we update and review on an annual basis going forward. So that's our take on this really, really important work. We partnered with the firm of Gensler, who is an architecture and design firm, and they added to their team the library consultant firm of Margaret Sullivan Studios. Many of the large urban public libraries in the country either have just recently or are using that team right now. It was really interesting to compare ourselves to some of our peers, as well as do about a year's worth of work. So we started formally having meetings and workshops in February of last year, and we had our Board of Trustees vote on it in December. So a good 10-month active process to get there, with community involvement, with staff involvement, a lot of iteration, and we wanted to both celebrate our values and our underlying core services, but also ensure that we were positioning ourselves to be of this moment and what we are called to.
That's fascinating. I think you're right about the cycle. I think 5 years is a reasonable term, um, because it does take time to do this. I mean, you said it took nearly a year, and if you have one every 3 years, I mean, you're going to spend a whole
You'd
lot of
always
time.
be doing strategic planning, right?
Right, right. But at the same time, you said you revisit it. A living document is something you just don't pull out every 5 years. And how did we do?
Right.
I think that's also a very powerful use of this. How how much staff? I mean, how many people that work for the library were involved in this?
Sure.
Or I guess you had some all hands meetings occasionally, or did you
Um,
have a single?
so so the staff of BPL today is about 480, I think 540 positions if we were fully staffed at the moment. The core staff and leadership joint working group was between 20 and 30 people. So those were individuals who had raised their hand and said, yes, they're enthusiastic and wanted to be along for the journey and help shape this document. We did our due diligence to ensure we didn't leave any part of our organization out by just going with those who had first raised their hands. So we wanted to make sure it was fully representative. Others had opportunity to participate in webinars and in surveys. We also asked staff at all of our locations to interview and be in dialogue with community members in the early stages. There was also a community-based survey that we used and some partner gatherings. And in our case, we have a couple of very important partners, such as our BPL fund, and as well as our MAP Center and our associates who raise money. And so having them part of this equation. So it was really a big family affair in some ways, not just our staff group, but community. I know there are other ways to do this where you go deeper into community, but that would be that takes a lot longer and is more costly.
Right, right. Well, you touched on funding, which I think is, and you also touched on the fact that budget challenges are universal as far as you can tell around the world. We had we had every library on recently,
Sure.
and are discussing with them about doing a workshop for basics of thinking about funding, fundraising. Their point was that over 90% of library budgets are from public funds, so bond issues and tax authorities and so forth, and less than 10% are from donations. And so this was their point about the strategy of having to build the public perception and strategies for public funding, in a word. And so I was wondering how you differentiate those sources, and have you had more success with public processes? Boston is famous as a university town, and for education is a priority. So libraries seem like they would enjoy support. But how does that work for your funding in terms of the donation?
Really great question. Really, really important topic. Because we can't do all of the things in our strategic plan if we don't have the resources and capacity to pay for it and grow it. So and not only is it a nice thing to talk about, but it's a essential thing to talk about. And I've also learned that there are almost as many funding models for libraries as there are actual libraries. So in many parts of the country, the mix of public funding might come from a levy or a tax, or it might come from a city or a county or a state. So we really kind of have to have some base principles that we can then adopt for our own local realities. In the case of Boston, about 85% of our operating budget, which is in the $50 million range, comes from the city of Boston. So we operate as a city department, in addition to having our own identity as well. But in our case, that the majority of our funding, vast majority of our funding, does come from the city of Boston. So in our case, that means we treat the mayor, we treat the city council, we treat our cabinet level officials as being donor partners, and try and manage the relationship with that lens in mind. We do have state funding as well. BPL also acts as the library for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So some of our services are absolutely available statewide. And so we treat the governor and as many elected officials as we can get their attention of. We often do this in collaboration with other libraries across the state, but we're treating them as funders and donors and stakeholders as well. And then you get to the private philanthropy space. We relaunched our previous foundation as our BPL fund, our 501c3 partner that is the primary philanthropic arm of the Boston Public Library. In a university environment, it might be an internal development office that has an equivalent role, for example. But in our case, we have a strong partnership with this relaunched fund, and their goal, their mission is to grow the private philanthropic funding stream. Some of that is corporations, some of that is individuals, some of that is estate planning, some of that is foundation asks, but really building a robust model and platform that can address all of those sectors within private philanthropy. And then, of course, not to be remiss, we do have individual friends groups associated with each branch who are much more active at the local level, and how we bring them into partnership is one of the aspects of our work ahead too.
Oh, that's a great plan, a great network of development. But it makes me think that even as 85% comes from the public and
Yeah.
more or less recurs,
We hope.
without that 15%, I
Yeah.
have a feeling that the perception of the quality of the services would drop a lot more than 15%.
I think so. I mean, I think, not to overgeneralize, but much of our city and state funding really takes care of basic operations and personnel. And often it is the private philanthropy that is able to support innovative programs, new ideas. One really strong example was when we renovated our Roxbury branch in one of the neighborhoods of Boston a few years back. We were able to build out a nutrition lab. We modeled it a little bit on the Philadelphia Free Public Library's innovative concept in that space, but it was private philanthropy that allowed us to hire the staff to really animate that space, offer incredible programming. And we, for example, have, I think, one of the first ever chefs in residence right now for this year to actually further animate that space. So Don, you're exactly right that without private philanthropy, none of us would be able to truly animate our spaces and bring them to life with engaging programming and support the way we would otherwise.
You mentioned E-rate as one of our general unknowns, I guess we could call it. How dependent are you on E-rate?
So BPL has participated in the E-rate program for now, I think, almost 20 years since its inception. This is, of course, for those who don't know, the funding mechanism that takes that surcharge that we all see on some of our utility bills, our telecommunications bills, that is administered by the Universal Services Administration, which is a quasi-federal agency. And the rules are set by the FCC, so it is controlled. It is legitimately controlled by a government entity for how libraries and other entities apply to support their funding needs. Our funding needs some years have been in the millions of dollars as we support telecommunications equipment replaces, refreshes. There are now additional service-oriented programs that you can get partial support for, including hotspots and basically the goal is to support the connectivity needs of our schools and libraries across the country. And these funding levels run to the 80% or higher levels with costs in the millions. So if we were to have one of those, if the E-rate was not in existence and we were at a point where we were doing our full refresh, instead of it costing us maybe $200,000, it would cost us $2 to $3 million. That would take basically a several percentage cut out of our operating budget in a given year. So we very much hope that this program continues, and if there is additional authorization needed to support it, that Congress will take that action to do it. Or perhaps with further analysis, people will realize, because it does fall under the FCC, there is actually no concern about how the money is being used, and it is being used for a legitimate civic purpose.
No, that's great. It is an ongoing challenge. There's new challenges to it, as you point out, but it underpins the universal service concept that the country built itself on. You know, if we consider a service to be a basic service like telephone, electricity, and now the internet,
Yep.
then that means that everyone should have affordable access to it.
Right.
And they don't. They don't. It hasn't happened with broadband because the carriers were able to kind of separate themselves from this concept, saying, no, this is a technology. We're just like Cisco and Intel, and we'll make investment decisions where we expect a return. So we don't have those kinds of obligations. So then it falls to the library to be the last, point of support and access for everyone. And there are still tens of millions of people out in the country that don't have access at all. And there are tens of millions more that I think at the peak, it was like 1 in 3 adults access the internet at a public library.
Mhm.
1 in 3. This is a phenomenal number. And that's, most of those probably had another source of it, but they went to the library for one reason or another. It was faster, it was quiet, it was convenient, whatever. And so this is so important, and it's grown even more important since the pandemic. We know that access is. Question from excuse me, from from one of the participants about the strategic plan kind of management. You said, this monthly review. How exactly does that happen?
Yeah, well, so because we just had it approved in December, we are now taking our time to be very deliberate about how we turn this into an implementable plan. So, sometimes, and I've seen this, there are aspects of our plan that are very specific. There are others that are more aspirational, and it will take more work to turn those into a specific set of action steps. So we plan, I'm using that word a lot, but we plan to take the next probably at least 3 months, maybe a little bit longer, to build those into action plans for the next 5 years. We have already committed to make this a standing item on our leadership team meetings and with reports to our board of trustees. So at a minimum, that will be happening as well. And as we get ready to ask our different teams and departments to develop their proposed goals, we will be asking all staff to use the language of the strategic plan and to be cognizant of either where their work falls under a specific goal or initiative, or where there's a specific goal or initiative that relates to their core area, like digital services, for example, that they participate in the development of plans. So I'd be happy to come back in 6 months or so and tell you how it's going, but that's our intention right now. And what is interesting is just because the plan was done and approved doesn't mean the planning work itself stops there. We actually have to turn it into the living document that people expect it to.
Of course. That sounds like a great idea to come back in 6 months to find out how that's actually working. Do are the library staff expected to know these 4 elements? I mean, be able to just recite them on demand?
I would hope so. We'll be doing a series of staff webinars and trainings over later this month and into March to help people understand what this is. I think those that are patron facing and developing new services it'll probably be an easy lift for them to adopt this language. But it's my dream that whether you're coding in the background or mopping the floors, that you understand that your role relates to community engagement or lifelong learning or being a welcoming and clean destination. So honestly, I think everybody should be able to see themselves in that. And those that are outward facing certainly be familiar with the language to talk about this framework.
That'll be interesting to see how deeply into the culture of BPL you can get these principles and goals. Thank you, Laura. Dave asks about the challenges represented, opportunities represented AI. I mean, this has been our most popular topic almost since the beginning, and it is very much on our minds. And so you had mentioned it, of course. So how did that come into play, and what did you decide to do in terms of AI strategically?
And this is very much a work in progress. I think we all started to pay much deeper attention, if we weren't already, when ChatGPT 4 started to come out, and Tom Friedman's great article about the fear and the possibilities and what's starting to become real, really being a prompt for everyone. Boston Public Library is very involved with the Urban Libraries Council and with the Association of Research Libraries in terms of working groups and sharing information on that front. We internally are still very much exploring what is the right thing to do. And how we should take advantage of this opportunity, and how we should understand where there are ethical or civic minefields to pay attention to here, because there are some. So right now, we do think this will be incorporated into our training curricula for patrons who want to go beyond the basic computer skills, either because it's on their phones and it's being used as a marketing tool for most technology. And so we want to make people comfortable with what it is and what it isn't as well. We do think there's a level beyond that, which is about workforce skill development. And so we will probably be partnering with other organizations to bring some programs online to support that. In terms of the internal opportunity, and this is where the path to hell is paved with good intentions, if you will. So it is an automation tool. There are some things that AI can do faster, and some things it can do better. There are yet very few things it can do both faster and better. So we want to be very cautious about how it is used. Some staff have been exploring with AI note takers for meetings. Some staff have been exploring, are there preliminary steps in cataloging where it makes sense to have AI just do the initial work or to draft a letter or a marketing blurb. My take is that the state of the technology today is it's fine to use as a drafting tool in any of those environments, but it should not be a replacement for human judgment or editing or fact checking. These things still hallucinate. Sometimes they make up very coherent answers. And it's all about having prompts, the right prompts to ensure, just as with any search engine, just as with any interface, how you ask a question often determines the veracity of the answer that you're going to get. So you have to be very careful about trusting that. Also, we have some concerns about how the large language learning modules have been built based upon either public or non-public domain information, and what are the ethical implications of that? You know, in the legal world, you know, you have this concept of a poison pill, so that if the source of evidence is not maintained, then you can't use it in a way that derives from that. I don't know that we'll go there with these tools, but we need to be very cautious about what is being added back to the module and for other learning, and who has the rights, what is happening to the rights conversation in this. So I think there are a lot of ethical and concern-based issues that we could provide public programming on. Again, in partnership, we would be the platform, not necessarily the expertise. This very much is a work in progress, and we're still exploring where we should or should not use these tools internally.
Each one of those could fill an hour easily of discussion, and it is a huge challenge just understanding, keeping up with it. The rate of change of technology is accelerating. It is the challenge to regulate, much less pass laws to regulate technology that can barely be defined. I mean, if you can't define it, if you can't give it a name that's comprehensible, what's the meaning of a law? So it's just outpacing our ability to define it.
And do we all read all of the license agreements whenever we install a new piece of software on our phone or our computer? Of course we do, right?
Click, click, click.
Signing
Okay.
away our rights, in addition to, I think, a social norm that has become much more about sharing personal information and personal privacy gets signed away through social media in a way that current generations are very comfortable with, perhaps too comfortable with, unfortunately. So this is not the ideal combination by any stretch of the imagination.
Great point. I mean, that's really a change. I'm not from this most current generation, and I worry about the privacy and my information and how it might be used to manipulate me and so forth. And I talk to younger people or just people that seem more casual than that, and they go, "Well, I don't mind. I want everybody to know more about me. That's my goal. So I'm posting every day, every hour, so that people will know more about me." Okay, you touched on social issues several times. There was a question from Anna about the increasing demands on libraries to deal with social issues and social services. And once again, public services that run into shortages, whatever the agency is, they say, well, you can go to the library, they'll help you. And even if they're not directing them, people just show up, and then because they understand that the library will try to help them no matter what their issue is and what their problem is. But we've seen a big increase in demands on these social services for libraries. Are you experiencing that, and how do you handle that?
We are. And this is a challenge regardless of size and regardless now of the environment. We used to think of this as primarily perhaps urban issue in some cases, but I think part of this is the degrade in mental health services more broadly across society. or the availability, if not the degrade in quality, the availability really of good mental health services across society, which is now a 20, 30-year phenomenon. Uh, so the good news is people are valuing their libraries as a good space to go, as a space to go. In many ways, if someone is looking for help with substance abuse or a place to sleep at night, that's the evolution of the reference question. It's a different type of information request that people are coming up with. They're coming with their whole selves. So there's a good dimension to this. The challenge is we are traditionally ill-equipped, ill-prepared, and ill-resourced to actually do that. And this is true for both larger and smaller. The smaller just don't have the budget. And if the larger ones are addressing it, chances are they're taking budget away from something else in order to support this work, whether it be social work or security personnel. The early days here, we built strong partnerships with community service organizations. So even before we were able to commit more resources of our own, we were bringing in local nonprofits who specialize in particular needs-based services for the populations, the patrons in crisis, the population most at need. So that's a good place to start. But there's no magic wand, unfortunately. These are relationships that take time. And it also, just like any other funding need, requires time to build up the case for support and go talk to whether it's civic officials or whether it's people in the community who are willing to donate. So there really are two dimensions. Let me say there are three dimensions to this. One is the actual service provider. Whether your plan is to add that to your own staff or ensure that you've got a regular, consistent offering through a partner, possibly in a library space. So that's one area. The second area is the unfortunate and difficult impacts on security and safety, because we want everybody to be safe. We want the patrons themselves to be safe. We don't want people who are in difficulty interfering with other people's enjoyment of the library. And we, of course, need to ensure that our staff feel and are safe in these environments as well. And of course, the third approach, which is our new social work manager, I hope is championing, and I hope we will adopt more formally, but thinking of both a case management and a trauma-informed approach to this work. That would be new for public libraries. Traditionally, we get to know people over time, but it's often about a specific transaction. I'm coming to a program. I'm looking for a book. I'm borrowing a book. The case management approach allows one to take more of a needs-based assessment of what's going on in the person's life and what do they need and continue to bring them back. But that is not something that we are able to do with the resources. We need more resources to be able to do this effectively to meet people. So Don, in your words, it's great that people are sending us here, but that means they need to send us the dollars and the staff to actually meet this new need at this new level too.
I hope that can be understood, but at the same time that these demands are growing, we're seeing a completely unprecedented assault on libraries for, with the book banning kind of being the spearhead of this attack, I would call it that. This has never happened before in the US, where libraries have been either loved, adored, or ignored, but not, every other public institution has armies of antagonists who will march down the street against the hospitals, the schools. Libraries have never had that until now. And it seems to fit this sort of trend. You touched on it a little bit, this kind of anti-intellectualism, anti-learning, and the general, well, maybe it's populism. I'm not sure about the politics of it, but it may be that, to quote the president-elect some years ago, he said, "I love the poorly educated." And this is kind of understandable because people with less critical thinking skills and education are more susceptible to emotional appeals, and this can lead us into very strange places. So, um, I guess you have to be hopeful that this is temporary,
You,
that this is a
you
blip, but not
do.
a.
We don't want to be naive about it, and it has some of these actions stemming from this made-up concern. Um, have had a real impacts on people in the profession, and have had real effects on others' access to information that they may need for their own mental well-being and for their own education. So I will not be dismissive of this. Um, um, so I think there are multiple strategies to combat this, and it depends in each local community. Are these objections really coming from your local community, or are they coming from outside it? Or is it outsiders genning up people in the local community? And so in many ways, our opportunity is to combat fiction with nonfiction. It is about being the trusted resource, and it's for everybody. We actually don't, it's not our business to worry about what someone's values, political beliefs, religious beliefs, origin stories are. Our job is to be there as the informational professionals, and that means showing up in support of curricula. The more we can make our story about the positive impacts we have on people's lives. And Don, just as we've seen some horrible things happen in the last few years, we've also seen the backlash against that emerge, where whether it's in court rulings that support intellectual freedom at the local level, the district level, or it is bills that support the profession of librarianship and protect people's ability to pick content for their community, or donors and stakeholders coming forward to say, no, this is too far. The stories are not all good, but there are as many good stories as there are bad ones, and I would want to center that. There is also strength in numbers, and organizations like ALA, PLA, ULC, ARL, those are the cohorts that can bring people together. In some ways, those that would want to disturb the value of public libraries are well organized. There may not be a lot of them, but they're very loud voices and can have do real damage. And so we have a duty on the other side, or in the middle. I mean, we're really not on another side. We really are in the center, but to equally be well organized about ensuring everybody's intellectual freedom rights are protected and preserved.
My notion about that is that libraries, not having had this experience in the past, have few defenses against it. That being this kind of benevolent organization that's open to all makes them kind of vulnerable to disruption. They're easy to disrupt. I mean, you go to a board meeting and there's one person that just wants to make trouble. The people that are giving their time, they're going, I really don't have time for this. I'm out of here. It's just easier to disrupt these kinds of the business of libraries, not the day-to-day thing, but
Oh, I think we've always had the local disruptor or curmudgeonly person or two in our worlds, and we're used to dealing with that. What's different today is the interconnectedness, the viral nature of recordings, and the instant news entertainment cycle, all of which creates an environment where one little snippet or one word said wrong suddenly becomes a national story. And that is chilling and different. And that part we're learning how to deal with that. But it's also true that it was librarians during when the Patriot Act was first introduced that fought tooth and nail to ensure that we were not sacrificing issues of privacy and confidentiality in the library world for the sake of perceived security threats. So I think there's more in our DNA and our background that we can leverage. It's just not a muscle we've had to exercise in this way, maybe at this scale or recently.
That's it. I think we have to hit the gym here on this one. This is a new workout regimen that's going to be our contribution to that is it just grew out of comments that we had from some of our speakers, non-librarian speakers, notably, saying what libraries are. And libraries are islands of truth in a typhoon of disinformation. That was a political cartoonist for The Economist said that. And former FCC chair, we've got a list of these. And when we looked at it, it goes, this is impressive. These are people that are influential, but have never been presented with that particular kind of challenge. So we're thinking that maybe every library, every community has people that would say something like that publicly, positively about their library that would be helpful in building these new muscles that libraries need to amazingly justify themselves and armor themselves against these attacks. And thank you, Internet. One more skill that has come on the line is that disruptors are now linking up and have vast megaphones of disruption. Okay, we've run pretty far over. It's just too fascinating to quit, David. And I want to thank you and everybody else that stayed, but I think we should wrap up. And can you have the last word? Can you leave us with anything you'd like to say about anything?
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for those who were able to join us live or may watch part of the recording a bit later on. This is a very important topic. It's one that has become close to my own heart and is really part of what we're about here at BPL. We're happy to share our experience and our knowledge and our information more broadly. You can reach out, just go to bpl.org and reach out to me or reach out to anybody here. I will close by saying I think the opportunities ahead may be more difficult, and certainly in the short term might be even more difficult than they have been. But I think the long arc here is one where public libraries are valued, libraries as a whole are valued, and that in the end, we will make a better difference for better societies wherever we are in the world by strengthening our own foundations. And so with that, here's best of luck to all of us and to great success in the year ahead.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, David. We've just loved having you and we'll have you back. We do want to track this strategic plan implementation and how effective that is in the real world of day-to-day life at the library. And so with this, we will conclude the recording and thank everyone. And